Yes. So without yes, just a brief background about this webinar series. If you have not attended this series before, it's a webinar series which is organized as part of a Horizon 2020 project, the TiGRE project, Trust in Governance and Regulation in Europe. If you want to know more, you can go to our webpage. Okay, so I'm really pleased to have with me today the four authors of the research that we will hear about today. It's Jonathan Zeitlin, who is a professor at the University of Amsterdam and director of the Amsterdam Center for European Studies. I have with me also Theresa Kuhn, who is a professor of political science at the University of Amsterdam as well. I have with me Maria Weimer, who is also at the University of Amsterdam. And I have with me David van der Duin, who is, according to my information, at Ghent University in Belgium. So without further ado, I would really like to give the authors the floor. So Jonathan and David, they will present, and all of the four of them will take questions. And I may...
Are you recording?
Yes, we are recording.
Excellent. Good luck.
Thank you. All right, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks so much, Tobias. Oops, I guess I have to first bring up my, hang on a second. I need to have visible on the, hang on a second. Sorry, yes, okay. Now I should be able to share my screen. I will start the slideshow from the start. Okay, so what I want to say to start with, we're very happy to be here. I was able to be at the very first seminar in this series. It's exciting to connect to people in a seminar format where we can interact face to face. What we're presenting here is the result of an interdisciplinary research project, which is funded by the Amsterdam Center for European Studies. It's a group of colleagues based at the University of Amsterdam. David was originally our research assistant, is now a PhD student at the University of Ghent. And I also want to acknowledge Martin Jensen, who is our current research assistant, has helped with data analysis. So the question that we set out to answer here, which I think is highly relevant to the theme of this series, is do governance reforms affect public acceptance of regulatory decisions? And if so, how? And what we did, and I'll explain that to you in more detail in a moment, was we conducted a pair of linked survey experiments on public attitudes towards the reform of EU pesticides regulation in 6 member states. And just to give you the punchline right away, we find that governance reforms which citizens strongly support can enhance their acceptance of regulatory decisions, even when these decisions run counter to their prior preferences on contentious and politicized issues. And we think that's quite an important finding. And there's surprisingly little research that's been done on whether and under what conditions governance reforms do enhance public acceptance of regulatory decisions. The literature we've seen focuses basically on procedural fairness, particularly transparency and stakeholder consultation, in acceptance of regulatory decisions. You can find a review of this literature in a recent piece by Byers and Aras in Regulation Governance. The studies that do look at this issue find that while perceived fairness of a decision-making procedure may indeed enhance participants' assessment of the procedure's legitimacy, their acceptance of the decision itself depends more on substantive preferences about policy outcomes. And I've listed a few of the most salient studies. Now, let's come to the topic that we're studying. EU pesticides regulation has become increasingly controversial and also politically salient over the past decade. And a lot of this controversy has focused on glyphosate. This is the world's most widely used herbicide. It's been designated as a probable carcinogen by the WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer, and it's led to quite large damage awards in US courts. In 2017, the EU reauthorized glyphosate, and this was very hotly contested and triggered public distrust in the current regulatory framework. So some signs of this are a European citizens' initiative to ban glyphosate, which got the necessary 1 million signatures in less than 5 weeks, and a series of proposed national or regional bans in different countries. And there is an ongoing debate within the EU about which reforms should be adopted to address these concerns. And this is what has inspired our work. So what do we try to do? First of all, to assess whether and how specific proposed reforms to decision-making procedures could impact public support for EU pesticides regulation. And secondly, we try to assess whether and how reform of the EU pesticides authorization procedure could impact public acceptance of its outcomes. And to do this, we conducted a pair of linked online survey experiments on public attitudes to reform of EU pesticides regulation. We did this among a representative sample of the adult population in 6 countries. So Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, and Sweden. 9,000 people participated in the survey. It was conducted by Ipsos in June 2020, and there were quotas for age, gender, education, and region of residence to assure representativeness within each country. Okay, so I want to describe for the first experiment, which is a conjoint survey experiment on public attitudes to pesticide regulation. In this experiment, each respondent was asked to rate and rank 6 proposed reform packages. They were shown 3 pairs of proposed policy packages for regulating pesticides in the EU. For each pair, they were asked to choose between the proposed packages and to rate them on a 5-point scale from strongly opposed to strongly support. And we chose the dimensions and the different options in the experiment to cover what we consider to be the most salient issues and choices in the EU debate on pesticides regulation. Okay, here you can see the dimensions and the options we showed. So there are 5 dimensions. The first is at what level should the decision be taken? We offer people the EU level only, the national level only, or a combination of the 2, which is actually the status quo. Secondly, in the second dimension, we asked what other factors should be considered in the decision, in addition to the effects on human health and the environment, which is the status quo. And here we offered them the effects on small and organic farmers, which were meant to to get at the broader socioeconomic and cultural concerns about pesticides, but also alternatively, the effects on the international competitiveness of European farmers. The third dimension, which has been very controversial, is what sources of scientific evidence should be considered in the authorization decision. We gave people three options: only scientific studies conducted on behalf of the manufacturer, all relevant scientific studies, and only scientific studies conducted by an independent body. The fourth dimension is if the pesticide is approved, are its effects systematically monitoring? And here there were two options: that there could be no systematic monitoring after an approval decision, and secondly, that there would be systematic monitoring with the possibility of removing the pesticide from the market in the case of unexpected negative effects. And here, this is equivalent to what has been called pharmacovigilance in drug authorization. And for those of you who may know some of the work I've done with Charles Sable and other colleagues on experimentalist governance, this is an experimentalist reform which has some support in the EU policy debate. And the final dimension is not really a design dimension. It's how will the decision-making procedure affect food prices? And the purpose of this was to get respondents to think about the possibility that there could be costs of stricter regulation of pesticides, but these amounts are completely hypothetical, and it's extremely difficult to estimate what the costs of reforms would be. Here, next, I just want to show you what the screen that the respondents saw looks like, or this is a sample screen. And so what you can see, first of all, is that both the options and the dimensions were randomized. So all the dimensions are covered, but the order in which they're covered is random, except for how the decision-making procedure would affect food prices, which we put last always so as not to bias or prime the respondents. But the options in the two packages per dimension are random. So you can see in the first line that it's possible to get two packages which have the same option on a given dimension. So then they're asked to rate the packages. So do you prefer option 1 or 2? And then to say how strongly, you're asked to rank them and then to rate them. So to rank which you prefer and how much you support or oppose each option. Okay, why do people do conjoints? Why do we do them? They're survey-based experiments to estimate the causal effects of policy design preferences for multidimensional issues, and the combination of the proposed measures into multidimensional proposal packages allows respondents to be confronted with more realistic options and trade-offs on complex policy issues. And this methodology has been widely used in political and public opinion research since it was introduced by Heinmuller and colleagues in 2014. And ACES has actually been doing quite a few of these conjoints, mostly on issues of economic and health policy in the EU. Now, here are our main findings. The way that you present the findings in a conjoint is to look at the average marginal component effects. And what this tells you is how the inclusion of one of these dimensions in a package increases or decreases the probability of support. Those are the black dots, and the purple triangles tell you how it affects how strongly they support. It affects the probability of support. And from this, you can see that the strongest effect is post-authorization monitoring, which increases by 22% the likelihood of support. And you can see as well that for all of the dimensions and all the options, the effects are even stronger for the strength of support or opposition. The other dimension, which is most significant, are whether all relevant studies are considered in the decision, and or only studies conducted by an independent public body. These are basically pretty similar, and that is relative to studies conducted on behalf of the manufacturer. You can see as well that an increase in food prices by 3% decreases by 7.7% the likelihood of support. You can also see that, interestingly, the level at which the decision is taken does not have a big impact on the decision. A combination of the EU and national levels increases support by 6%, but relative to only at the national level and the EU level doesn't decrease it too much. You can see as well that the effects on small and organic farmers are about as significant in the positive direction as an increase in 3% in food prices in the opposite direction. And here I just, recapitulate what I explained in relation to the chart. I can say that all the effects except EU level decision making only were highly significant at the 0.1% level. And you can see here how we conducted the analysis, which I won't go into in detail here. I think it's also worth drawing attention to what the implications are for which kinds of proposals as packages would receive what level of support. So we take the most popular package, which is a combined EU national level decision, considering the effects on small and organic farmers, considering all relevant scientific studies. And I have left out, it includes post-authorization monitoring and no increase in food prices. 72% of the whole survey would support this. And if we then combine it with increase in food prices by 3%, support only falls to just under 65%. And by comparison, the least popular proposal, which basically reverses the features of the most popular one, would have only 13%. So to conclude on the first experiment, the key finding is that Europeans in 6 member states, which we consider also to be representative of the EU more broadly, have clear and strong preferences about how pesticide authorization decisions should be taken. But this then raises the question for our second study, which is, are citizens prepared to accept authorization decisions taken under a procedure they support, even when these decisions go against their prior preferences on the policy outcomes? And to put it another way, can the right governance procedure convince citizens to accept decision outcomes. And for all of us who study governance, this is a crucial issue. Okay, and we dealt with it through this second experiment, which is nested in the first, and it's an ordinary survey experiment on public acceptance of regulatory decision-making on pesticides authorization. So the first thing that we did, and this is all part of the same survey, is after we conducted the conjoint, we asked the respondents, had they heard of glyphosate? If they said no or they don't know, we removed them from the sample. If they said yes, and that's about half the respondents, which is really very high, actually. Then we asked them, should farmers be allowed to use pesticides containing glyphosate? 3/4 of them said no. 15% or so said they didn't know, and 12% or so said yes. The ones, in each case, what we then did was we showed the respondents one of the packages that they most strongly supported from the conjoint. And in the first version, which were the no and a random half of the don't knows, we asked them, would they be willing to accept the approval of glyphosate by the EU if it was based on this decision-making procedure? For the ones who said, yes, farmers should be allowed to use glyphosate, or half of the don't knows, we asked them whether they'd be willing to accept a ban of glyphosate by the EU if it were based on this decision-making procedure. And so then we used this experiment to test two hypotheses using ordinal logistic regression. The first is, if the hypothetical glyphosate authorization decision opposed to respondents' prior expressed preferences is based on a decision-making procedure proposal that they support, they're more likely to accept this decision than to refuse it. And secondly, a second hypothesis is, the stronger the support for the decision-making procedure on which the hypothetical authorization decision opposed to respondents' prior expressed preferences is based, the more likely they are to accept this decision. And we found that both hypotheses were confirmed. So the odds of accepting the decision become 2.43 times higher when the authorization decision opposed to respondents' prior preferences is based on a decision-making procedure proposal they support, compared when this is not the case, holding everything else constant. And secondly, as the rating given to the most preferred proposal package increases, respondents' predicted decision acceptance probability increases and their non-acceptance probability decreases. And it's also, we also found that the probability of saying ex post that they don't know also increases slightly, indicating that their opposition to decision acceptance has weakened. And so here you can see this, how this works out, that as proposal support increases, decision acceptance also increases, and at the same time, the opposition decreases and the don't know increases as well. Now, this is asymmetrical. Respondents are more likely to accept than to reject the outcome of an authorization decision counter to their prior expressed preference if it's taken under a procedure they support. But this is less true of the people, the ex-ante opponents of glyphosate, the people who said first that farmers shouldn't be allowed to use it. But even for this group, an authorization decision taken under a procedure they support reduces the probability of opposition by 40%. If we look at the people who said they didn't know whether farmers should be allowed to use glyphosate, we find that they had a 59% probability to accept an approval decision and a 70% probability to accept a ban if it was taken under, if the decision was taken under a procedure that they support. Here you can see the differences between these four groups, and you can see that the group which is least likely to accept the decision are those who were opposed ex ante to glyphosate. But you can also see that their opposition has dropped from 100% to 60%. So we can also ask, what explains the resistance to glyphosate decision acceptance? And we found that the most important predictors of respondents' unwillingness to accept a hypothetical glyphosate approval taken under a decision-making procedure they support were, first of all, their expressed level of concern about pesticides. We asked some additional survey questions to probe that and use that for this analysis, and also the degree to which they think that EU pesticides regulation should be precautionary. In this case, that the authorities should err on the side of caution in the authorization decision. I'll show you two graphs that illustrate this. So here you can see, excuse me, that as concern about pesticide, the dangers of pesticide rises, the likelihood of no acceptance increases and vice versa. And similarly, the more precautionary preferences that people have, the less likely they are to accept the decision. You can see also that that kicks in at lower levels of precautionary preferences than at the levels of concern. And here I'm going to hand over to David van der Douwen to present the results of some further analyses we did on trust issues.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. So in order to improve our understanding of for whom this, the acceptance, what people are more likely to accept the outcome of the hypothetical decision-making procedure, we also looked into the extent to which trust in government, trust in business, and attitudes towards science can explain the likelihood of acceptance. I should say that here, when we talk about government trust, we're talking about both trust in one's national government and trust in the EU government or in the EU. Because the data showed that for this particular analysis, these two variables more or less worked identically, had an identical effect. So we just combined them for this particular analysis. And this analysis shows that both trust in government and trust in business increases the odds of decision acceptance, while on the other hand, trust in science or attitudes towards science have very little effect on the probability of decision acceptance compared to these other two variables. And when we compare trust in government and trust in business to the more basic variable of supporting the proposal on which the hypothetical decision is based, and the strength of this support, then we see that they have a somewhat less strong effect. So in relative terms, these variables are somewhat less impactful, but they are still impactful, as we can see on the next slide. So Jonathan, if you can. So this graph shows the effect of trust in government on decision acceptance, showing that as trust in government goes up, the likelihood of acceptance goes up as well, and vice versa. And on the next slide, we see a very similar relationship for trust in business, while on the next slide, we can see that trust in science virtually has no effect. So the variable we used here is whether people believe that scientists can be trusted to produce true and reliable results, and it shows virtually no relationship. So what we conclude from this particular analysis, so not the overall conclusion, but just from this particular analysis of trust in business, government, and science, is that to us it seems that for general people, pesticides regulation seems to be mostly an affair of government and business, while not so much of the scientists involved in the process. So I'll hand back over to Jonathan now.
Just as regards the previous conclusion, I want to emphasize that although trust in government and business does have effects here, it is really striking that the support for the proposal is more important. So it is not the diffuse general trust in government and business is not playing as big a role as really, you know, the content and design of the governance process. So to conclude, our study provides strong evidence that governance reform citizens strongly support can enhance acceptance of regulatory decisions counter to their prior expressed preferences, and that even on highly politicized issues like authorization and use of pesticides. And it's quite striking that the features that really make a difference here are post-authorization monitoring and review and non-exclusive reliance on scientific studies conducted on behalf of the manufacturer. Now, as you've seen, these effects are not uniform. Instead, they vary between ex-ante supporters and opponents of glyphosate, and that seems to depend particularly on people's level of concern about pesticide and their precautionary preferences. But even among ex-ante glyphosate opponents, 40% wouldn't oppose a positive authorization decision if it were taken under a regulatory decision-making procedure they support, which I think is quite a striking finding. Now, compared to previous experimental studies, which focused mostly on procedural fairness, our results show much stronger effects of citizen support for a regulatory decision-making procedure on acceptance of policy outcomes opposed to their prior expressed preferences. So why is that the case? Well, what we conjecture is that our study finds stronger effects of support for a regulatory decision-making procedure on decision acceptance than previous studies, because the treatment we offer in the conjoint experiment, that is this mix of dimensions and options, is much richer than those in previous experiments and contains policy proposals respondents value more highly, like this post-authorization monitoring and review and diversification of the sources of data on which decisions are taken. So thanks for your attention, and we look forward to your questions and comments.
Yes, thank you so much, David. Sorry. Yes, of course, David and Jonathan. Now I'm getting confused. So I would like ask all participants if you have, so there's some virtual clapping going on. That's very nice. But if there's any questions that you might have, or any comments, I'm happy to give you the floor. But while you may still think about those questions, I just put myself on the list, and I was wondering, I think that the design of your study is really interesting, and also just like the combination of these two experiments. But one thing I was wondering about, you're confronting in your second experiment, you are confronting these respondents with a decision-making procedure where you say that's one they kind of prefer. So you ask them about, do you agree to using glyphosate or not? And then what you're doing is confronting them with a decision-making procedure that they kind of agree to. And I was wondering, and that will be different for different respondents. So can you be sure that there's kind of the same degree of agreement or disagreement with that decision-making procedure for all respondents? Because it's not constant. To me, it looks like it's kind of a moving target depending on their responses to the in the conjoint experiment. So I'm wondering whether how you kind of control for that. I'm not sure if I hope.
I would say Theresa or David should take that question.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and we also have been puzzling about exactly that, because in a way we don't always know, or we don't always have respondents who really like one decision-making procedure. However, the advantage of our design is that we actually have very fine-grained information to what extent respondents support one option or not, because we actually ask them two questions. One is, do you prefer option 2 or option 1 or option 2? So that's just basically, yeah, yes or no. One of them you prefer. But then in the next question, we actually ask them to rate them. And this gives us clear information on whether people are, yeah, in a way enthusiastic about a decision-making procedure or have only lukewarm support. Exactly how this is now then used in the experiment, I don't remember, but I think there David can step in how which people we actually took out in the end.
Yeah, so I think it's important. The essential thing here is that different people were, during the second experiment, shown a different proposal which they preferred. So for each individual respondent, the proposal which they were shown during the second experiment, on which the hypothetical glyphosate decision was based on their personally expressed preference during the first conjoint experiment. So out of the 6 packages that they were shown, we for each package know how strongly they support it, and we picked the package which they or the proposal which they supported most strongly. And if they had an equal rating for multiple, we picked one of those randomly.
I see. Okay.
Maybe I can add just one point, because we did one additional thing which we didn't show you, which is that we asked how, in addition to the strength of the support for a proposal, the inclusion of specific elements in that proposal, specific options for specific dimensions, affected the odds of decision acceptance. And we found that those 2 dimensions that I mentioned, which were most strongly supported, the post-authorization monitoring and the independent sources of information, those had a further increase in the odds of the likelihood to accept the decision of about 1.3 times. So we really, because of the logic of the conjoint and the fine-grained data, we can really identify the, let's say, the marginal effects, even of a particular dimension, option dimension, being included in the package that people were asked to take into account for decision acceptance.
Okay, thanks a lot. I don't see any questions or comments now, but still I would like to invite everyone to come with questions and comments. And while you may still think about a question, I was wondering about, you mentioned that the different the different treatments in the conjoint, the different let's say values of the variables you include, that they represent sort of some of the most salient dimensions of this whole debate about glyphosate in the EU. So I was wondering, how did you identify those? I mean, what was the procedure? Was that, you know, well, just your knowledge about this, or was there any kind of more systematic approach to it? I would be interested in that. Maybe you decide, Jonathan, who should answer that. You know the team best.
I think Maria should come in here.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you, Tobias, for the question, which is a very important one. So basically, indeed, the way we chose it was not systematic, but more based on our understanding of the regulatory debate, combined with a review of the literature and how it responded, among other things, to the glyphosate controversy. In addition, we also we basically reviewed all positions, be it from academia, be it from EU institutions, or be it from other stakeholders such as NGOs, you know, and other relevant organizations working in pesticides regulation. And I myself have participated in a process that was initiated by the European Parliament, which was a special investigation, or the establishment of a special committee to investigate the way that glyphosate was authorized. And in that process, there was a variety of stakeholders that was heard, and I kind of could witness all the points of debate that the Parliament went through. So that was based, our choice of these issues was mainly based on that. But I have to say that there are some issues which we didn't cover specifically by our survey, and that was because we had to make a trade-off or a compromise. Some issues were simply too complicated to formulate a question that would be suitable for the design of this survey.
Okay, I think
because it is a very technical, it is a very technical field.
Yeah, I think that fits quite well actually with one question we received, and that is Andreas Munk-Hansen, who asked the question. I don't know if he wants to ask the question himself. I mean, I can just read it. That's also fine. Thank you for the presentation. Do you have any results indicating the citizens' typical knowledge about the decision-making procedure? Are the ordinary citizens well informed about the procedure? Guess this is a necessary condition for the results to be implemented in practice. So what do citizens know about this?
Maria, why don't you go ahead and tackle this? Maybe I will comment also.
Yeah, that is a good question. I would say it depends a little bit on, I guess, what you understand as citizen. If we really go to the individual citizen, or if we are also considering collective actors, stakeholders. Honestly, I cannot really say how much individual citizens are knowledgeable about the specifics of procedure. But what I can say is that the glyphosate case has really increased public understanding, public knowledge of pesticides regulation. And so that might not be up to a level where citizens would really understand how every step of the procedure works. But I think there was a lot of amplification of very specific issues. For instance, the fact that the German Institute for Risk Assessment has pasted a lot of information from the manufacturer's dossier and without referencing the manufacturer as a source. These kind of specifics about the steps of risk assessment, they were quite widely publicly discussed. But it is, of course, difficult to say, ultimately how much specific knowledge we can assume citizens to have about this.
Theresa, you looked like you've put your hand up. You wanted to say something. I'd like to say something about this too, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think, this is absolutely an important question, and we have chosen here a survey that is representative for the overall population. So we actually have made sure that there are people of all different kinds of educational backgrounds, gender, age, and geographic quotas also included. So we very consciously did really a population survey and not an expert survey, and also not an expert citizen or informed citizen survey. So by doing that, we automatically have included people in the survey that will never have heard of glyphosate before, for example. And we actually have a question also on that included. The information we get from this survey also includes people that are not informed about this process. And we actually think for the questions that we ask, this is highly relevant because we actually want to know what ordinary citizens think about it. I think the strength of this design is that we do give them quite some information. So it's not just a normal survey where we say, do you agree with glyphosate banning, yes or no? But we actually put a lot of effort in explaining the context. So before respondents take the decisions or actually see the different profiles, they also get some information about the whole context of this survey. They might not be as informed as others, but knowing their opinions about this process from a public opinion perspective is highly important. And just to give you in a way an analogy, right now we're dealing with COVID-19, which is always decided by experts, but we ignoring the disagreement of the non-experts can also have quite some negative consequences, as we saw, for example, in the Netherlands last week when there were big riots. So I think even though their opinions might not be as knowledgeable, it's at least very important to know what also uninformed people know about it. And then we do have some information in the survey included, which allows us to, for example, differentiate between informed and not uninformed respondents, maybe not so much on the procedure, but on the topic in more general terms. And that is also quite insightful there. But I think Jonathan also still wants to say.
Yeah, I want to leave. I see that Robert Finger has a question, which I'd like to hear, but let me just say that I don't think that having a fine-grained knowledge of the procedure is a necessary condition for the results to be implemented in practice. I mean, the point is actually to inform European decision makers about what the public thinks, and to also make an intervention in the policy debate at the EU level. And I think that our results are sufficiently specific and granular to do that, even though we avoided really abstruse questions like the difference between active substances like glyphosate, where decisions are taken at the European level, and a so-called, plant protection product like Roundup, which includes also other formulants, where the decisions are taken at the national level. We thought that to ask that question was beyond the capacity of ordinary citizens, and so we just asked them about should the decision be taken at the European level only, the national level only, or a combination of levels. And I think it's amazing to me actually how many people in the survey have heard of glyphosate and had well-developed views about how these decisions should be taken.
All right, thank you so much. We have two questions from the audience. First, Robert, and after that, Alessandra. But first, Robert, and then the authors can respond, and then I give the floor to Alessandra. Thanks.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for that really exciting presentation. So that's fantastic work. So my name is Robert Finger. I'm Professor of Agricultural Economics and Policy at ETH Zurich in Switzerland. And so we deal with pesticide and pesticide policies from that agricultural economics and policy perspective. I have a question. It wasn't the purpose of your study to look for country differences, but nevertheless, is there something that you see? Because my question is motivated by 2 points. A, pesticide policies differ sharply across countries. For example, France has this Ecophyto plan, and I mean, many people know that there's a lot of action going on. Denmark has you haven't included Denmark, if I recall that correctly, but they have a high pesticide tax. So this is something that might differ. And then we recently published a paper where we also looked at kind of societal concerns on pesticides using Google Trend data. The first author, Serge Schaub, was also in that call. And we saw sharp differences in the dynamics. So for example, in Switzerland, there's a big kind of like peak in Googling pesticides because there's a lot of societal debate on it. In Germany, it's less the case. So saying that there are some differences across countries, was this an issue that you saw? Or
maybe I can tackle this. We disaggregated the results, the average marginal component effects by country, and because we were expecting that indeed there might be differences, and to our surprise, the differences are very minor. The only major differences, and they're not really major, is that in Sweden there was a 3% more negative reaction to a decision taken only at the EU level. And in the Netherlands, for whatever reason, I don't know why, there was a similar, maybe 2% more probability to support a proposal if it were based only on, studies conducted by an independent public body. So in a way, the business skepticism was even stronger in the Netherlands. Otherwise, the results at the country level are very similar to the results for the sample as a whole. And maybe it's worth telling you the criteria we used to choose the 6 countries. So we looked at GDP, size of the agricultural sector, structure of the agricultural sector, particularly relative size of organic farming versus intensive farming, average quantity of pesticides used, membership of different agricultural zones. As I'm sure you know, the pesticide decision-making uses 3 zones, so we made sure to have each zone represented. And we used length of EU membership. And finally, as a proxy, for like political attitudes of government, we used the information that's available about voting on authorization of genetically modified organisms in EU comitology committees. And so, I mean, it's not, of course, it's possible that the results could change a bit with a different mix of countries, but we thought using all those different axes of variation, we covered, you know, most of the differences between EU member states. But we would be very happy to exchange information with you and learn about your study and see how that fits together with our study.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks also, Robert, for sharing some references in the chat. So I think that's great to start this this dialogue. We have first question now comes from Alessandra, and after that we have Roma. But Alessandra first.
Okay, thanks. First, thanks for the wonderful presentation. It's very, very interesting. I had a kind of a twofold question. One is maybe I missed something in the beginning because my connection was not completely right, but could you see a pattern in the criteria that you designed for the how decision making is taken, so how people like that procedure? Could you see this as resonating with ideas like counter-democracy of Rosanne Vallon, for instance, where there is more involvement of citizens? And I say it's a proxy because I see the criterion of having independent scientists as possibly a proxy to that. So this would be my first question, whether there is something more general than the individual criteria that you chose. I mean, I know Maria's followed the debate, but I'm wondering whether it can be generalized how you extracted the criteria. And the second is more also specific to the substance of the regulation of glyphosate, because in my study of it, also something that did strike me is that when it comes then to the control on quantity of pesticide used, there is very little regulation in Europe. So was that in any way considered as a factor by which people could have changed their attitudes toward the decision? I know you are interested in the trust in government mainly, but I was thinking, again, at a more general level, how the regulatory background may alter the perception of citizens vis-a-vis a certain technology, etc. Thanks a lot.
I'll take the question. We did not ask about public participation as a criteria. Of course, it's something we could have done. It would have been a somewhat different kind of study than what we did. I mean, what is interesting is that, and I was surprised by this, the level of support for simply taking account of all relevant studies is very slightly higher than the support for the idea of taking account only of studies conducted by an independent public body. And the respondents, broadly speaking, you know, with a few exceptions like this minor difference in the Netherlands, seem to have considered them to be equivalent. What they really didn't like is the idea of relying on studies conducted on behalf of the manufacturer. So we did not address this question of public participation in the decision-making procedure. For your other question, as I mentioned, in the country selection, we did look at the information about pesticide use, and we tried to choose more and less pesticide-intensive using countries in our sample. We do have information as well, which we have not analyzed yet, about whether individual respondents live in farming areas, and whether they have whether they themselves are farmers or have members of their immediate family who are farmers. And of course, it could be interesting to see if there are any connections there.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. We have one more question, and I would suggest that this will also be the final question. Roma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm sorry I joined late. To ask my question, I perhaps need to give you just a little background. So I'm a specialist in biopesticides. I actually do registrations of biopesticide technologies. But I'm a consultant, so I work across a whole range of university projects, and I've done some work in Norway also about perceptions of farmers, apple farmers, to pesticides, what they do. And thinking about the work that you've been describing here, I was wondering, what do you think you would have had a different responses if you'd been asking or thinking about a technology that is a biocontrol, biopesticide technology, whereas I think the focus of what you do was chemical pesticides. So do you think there would have been a difference in the respondents if it had been a different technology as to what they felt, how the governance should be conducted?
Maybe I can throw it back to you and ask you why you would think there would be a difference. I'm not highly knowledgeable myself. Maria may be more about biopesticides, but indeed, in the first part of the experiment, we just asked about pesticides in general, and then only then did we move to glyphosate as what we thought would be the pesticide that people would have been most likely to have heard of and have an opinion, a prior.
So coming back on that, then, yeah, so the reasons we're thinking why they might be different is, so it's one regulatory system for everything. Around about 40% of the active substances are now biopesticides, but the majority of them are low risk with low tox profiles, and there's a general perception that a biopesticide biocontrol agent has causes less harm to environment and to people, whereas glyphosate is quite politicized and quite a flag. So I just wondered how that might have affected responses.
I mean, I would be very surprised, maybe other people in the team can come in, if any significant proportion of respondents would have been knowledgeable about biopesticides as opposed to chemical pesticides. I mean, that's the kind of distinction which is actually probably hard to get at in a mass survey of this kind. And I wonder whether, you know, in the studies that you've been involved with, you know, you do ask this question about whether people, you know anything about biopesticides, even know what a biopesticide is.
If I can just jump in, I mean, I don't have seen any research on this, but I would expect that this is a question where framing really matters. And if we had framed it, or if we had asked instead on, you know, biopesticides and just used the word bio or organic, I think certain groups of society would have reacted differently to this particular survey, because they're less skeptical about biological or organic products than against, you know, some kind of artificial, in a way, that's how it's often perceived, product. So I think it's a very interesting question that we cannot fully answer with our research design. But I would expect less, in general, less opposition to it, and more, and also this, if you remember from the second study, we have this asymmetric result that the people who are originally against glyphosate, they have a harder time accepting the outcome against their wish, even if the procedure is in line with their preferences. I think in that case, we would not have this hard opposition, you know, if it was not about glyphosate, but about some biological product. I think respondents would be, you know, could be more easily swayed to accept the outcome because they like the people. That would be just my hunch.
I would like to just quickly add, so I think I agree with Theresa, and I've had now a second to think about it. I think this is a very interesting question, which, as Theresa and Jonathan said, we are not able to address right now. We can only hypothesize about it. But I think when it comes to the first part of the survey, so the conjoint survey, I'm not sure it would have made a lot of difference. See, I think maybe for the second part, where we asked about glyphosate, there is probably a difference of perception between pesticides and chemical pesticides. But we modeled that specifically on a case that's particularly controversial, and that's a chemical pesticide. But for the first part of the study, I'm not sure why it would. Now it's just, I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, I would need more time to think about it, but why would people, you know, change their minds about post-market monitoring, for example, based on the distinction between biopesticides and chemical pesticides? The same for evidence, sources of evidence. Why would they change their minds and allow for more manufacturers' evidence in the case of biopesticides, but not in the case of chemical pesticides? So for the first part, for the conjoint, I'm not sure it would have made such a big difference.
All right.
Thank you.
Roma, are you happy? Yes. Okay.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I've got piles more questions, but I'm conscious of time.
Okay. So I think we've had a great presentation, super interesting research. I'm very much looking forward to seeing some paper coming, or several papers coming out of that. And I would also thank everyone for great discussion, great exchange on your research here. And now's the time for advertising the next TiGRE seminar or webinar, which will be taking place at the very same time and same place tomorrow. And then we will have Dan Carpenter speaking about credible products depending on credible regulation. And that kind of, I think that's quite closely related. So I hope to see many of you tomorrow as well. And again, thank you so much for participating. And if you happen to if you want to see the presentation again and so on, or want to recommend it to some colleagues, then you will find the video of of today's webinar on our website soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Jonathan, Theresa, David, and Maria in particular. And it was a great experience having you.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, yeah.
In the audience, and we're happy for people to contact us about the study,
Yes.
and to have further exchanges with people by email. We're aiming to produce a report, a policy report, and then to produce probably 3 papers on different aspects of the findings. So watch this space. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.